15 years from today, I'll be home. I'll be the first human to step on Mars.
Alyssa Carson, the future first human to go to Mars. People often ask me why I'm so hopeful about the future, why I don't think we have anything to be afraid of. Well, Alyssa is the perfect example of why. I'm fortunate that my career surrounds me with the best and bravest people, those who are fighting for the future of this country and the world in extraordinary ways. But when we think about who those people are, we usually imagine activists, politicians, maybe artists. We don't always think about scientists. When JFK declared that we will go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard, he ignited a race that fueled a generation's love of math and science. Children dreamed of becoming engineers, mathematicians, rocket scientists. We still benefit from the breakthroughs of that era today. And at the end of it, we did it. We went to the moon. I wear a ring engraved with the date 7/20/69 as a personal reminder of that day and the journey that led to it. For me, it's proof that we can still do big things, that I could get my bill passed, but also that when we come together around a shared dream, we can achieve the extraordinary. Alyssa Carson dreams of being the first human on Mars. And in pursuit of that dream, she has already accomplished more than most people could in 3 lifetimes. She is brave, brilliant, determined, and so much like Ellie in Contact that I won't be surprised if Jodie Foster plays her in a movie someday. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with Alyssa. Her book, Ready for Liftoff, is inspiring, and even if you're not a huge space geek like me, I think you'll find your heart a little lighter and the fire in your belly a little hotter after hearing her story. So let's get into it. Well, everyone, I'm really thrilled. I was just saying I have called myself a space nerd. I no longer can because we've got the ultimate space nerd with us today. I'm the amazing Alyssa Carson, who is the author of this really fantastic book, Ready for Liftoff, which will, of course, be linked in the notes. And it's all about Alyssa's quest to become the first person on Mars, which I have a fantasy very often about leaving humanity and just being in a space capsule all by myself, just with books and movies, traveling to Mars slowly. But Alyssa has made it a mission. So Alyssa, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So let's just start with you giving just a little bit of a brief intro to who you are.
Yeah, I am an astrobiologist and aspiring astronaut as well. I've always had an interest in space and really always wanted to work in the space industry. I was very inspired to get involved in the industry at a young age and kind of be involved in research or either other activities going on in space. And now I work primarily in astrobiology, so kind of a mix of like microbiology and space. So I'm currently a PhD student working on a PhD in space and planetary science, but again, focus is astrobiology. And now I primarily am focused on that, but of course also continuing to pursue my ultimate dream of making it to space one day, but this is just another stepping stone in doing that. So at the moment, mostly research focused and doing research, which has been kind of really cool to contribute to the science industry in that way. And yeah, continuing to build that resume.
Well, we're going to talk a little about astrobiology in a minute, but I want to start with this whole dream that you have, right? I am also sort of a woman on a mission with an impossible dream. I know how hard that can be. I know how difficult it can be to sort of keep the faith and motivate yourself and how many detractors there are. But my mission is nowhere near as grand as going to Mars, which at this moment is still a thing that we cannot do. So can you just talk to me a little bit about how this started, which if you read the book, you'll get a really good description. But mostly, how do you keep the faith and how do you really keep the vision alive to do this thing that at this moment is not a thing anyone can do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so when I first got interested in space, I mean, no one in my family had any connection to space or science or anything similar. And so it was kind of a bit of an odd interest for me to pick up and have all of a sudden. But, my dad was still pretty supportive and helping me get, material and start learning about space. And I think in general, my interest just came from, the more I learned about space, the more interested I was in it. And so it made me want to learn more and learn more. And so that kind of led to this progression of really wanting to work in the space industry. The conversation about Mars, honestly, mainly just started because I asked my dad about space and all these random questions, and all my dad really knew was, oh, well, we've been to the moon before. And I was like, okay, well, check, like that's done. My little self was like, okay, well, that's over with. Like, what's the next thing to do? Obviously, not understanding the complexity of having to send people to Mars, but that really started just kind of a fascination with Mars and an interest in there. And so a lot of like the things that I was wanting to like read on was Mars focused. And obviously, I think even still today, no matter how close or far we are from a mission to Mars, I do think Mars is still kind of that one of the next stepping stones in space exploration. I think it's something that we'll eventually get to, someday. And so I think that it's always been kind of an area of interest for me. And I mean, even now with my PhD, all my research kind of revolves around Mars at the moment. So it's always been kind of a special place. But I think, as I got older and learned more about space, I think I really just wanted to be a part of the space industry in some capacity. Obviously, understanding the process of becoming an astronaut, so much of that is out of my control. I can't necessarily tell them to choose me, or I can't tell them to, put me on a certain mission or anything like that. All those kinds of decisions are out of my control. So I think really like, as I got older, the core goal was really just to work in the space industry and be a part of it. And then obviously on the side, be working my hardest to achieve that, if that would to ever be possible. But I think at the end of the day, even now, I feel like I'm already living a lot of the dreams that young Alyssa had.
Well, it's amazing it's that you say that, because my mind was sort of blown by all of the things that you have done to try to prepare to become an astronaut. Becoming a scuba diver and a licensed pilot. I think you have broken every space camp record that ever was, or invented some new ones. You've really, you've met everybody in the space industry. You've really spent your life since you were 7 preparing to be an astronaut in a way that I think probably no one else ever has. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about what it takes to become an astronaut?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to kind of understand. I mean, I think one thing that I always try to emphasize to kids and students is astronaut isn't really a career. You can't go to school to become an astronaut. It's not a career in of itself. You have to think of it more as like a destination. Every astronaut that's ever gone has some other job before they go to space. They're either an engineer, they're a doctor, they were in the military, they had some sort of career path that they pursued, and then eventually that translated to space, and a goal that we had within space. And so that was really what led me to doing so many, I guess, random seeming things to quote unquote become an astronaut. Not necessarily that those things are required, but I was really trying to figure out, okay, what is my actual career path? I can say that I want to become an astronaut and that's all great, but then what do I actually want to do? What do I actually see as a career path? And that was something a lot harder to answer, because I feel like people are like, you knew exactly what you wanted to do at a young age. And, I kind of did, but then also at the same time, I really didn't, just because there are so many career paths within the space industry. And I mean, even now within research, you can constantly change your area of research and you can always zoom in. So there's always kind of more decisions to be made. But by doing things that I knew related to space in some way, like getting my pilot's license was a great one where, I wasn't sure if becoming a pilot was something I was really interested in. It was a common path for a lot of previous astronauts, whether that was a civilian pilot or a military pilot. But, I think they're really important because you learn so much about yourself. I learned so many really good skills from doing it, even though I wasn't like, wow, I love this and want to do it every single day of my life. But I still learned so many skills that I use in other areas. And so, they were all really helpful in kind of building these like key parts. But for the most part, they were really just to figure out what kind of career path I'd want to to pick. And it's really funny because you'll ask astronauts today, like, one of the more annoying things is that everyone just kind of asks them all their trip to space or what they did in space, and they're like, wow, I had this whole life before that mission. I have a lot of other things that I did, but usually everything just gets swamped by the fact that you went to space. So people can just kind of forget that they're real people and they have real careers that are also completely normal. So it's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind when you have that interest.
I mean, that's fair, but also going to space is awesome, and it would also be
of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it sounds like, and I got this a little from the book, but even just hearing you talk now, that your definition of success has really changed, and that, for a long time you were just like laser focused on, I'm going to be an astronaut, I'm going to go to Mars, but then I know like you started out being really interested in astrophysics, and then astrobiology sort of came along, and that what your definition of how you want to live your life and your measures of success seem to have really sort of matured and grown as you've grown.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think, when I was first learning about space, I started so narrow-minded and just like, this is the only information I know about space. And I mean, honestly, with my interest in astrophysics, as you mentioned, like, it was honestly the only other career path I knew of as like a potential option other than being an engineer. And I knew I didn't necessarily want to do that. And so I was like, well, what can I do other than be an engineer? I guess astrophysics is the only other option, So I think, as I grew up and as I learned more about the opportunities in space and a better idea of how, the space industry works, that just like kept broadening what I saw the future as, because honestly, not only did it open more possibilities, but it also just kind of refined them in a way, just to know what it actually meant to pursue a career in space.
So please, like I'm a 5-year-old, please explain astrobiology to me.
Yeah, I would say astrobiology is like the mix of all the sciences and how they apply to space. So it's a bit broader than something like astrophysics. And it can be a bit similar to astrophysics, where you lean more like computer, doing like data, but it kind of leans a little bit more into experimental research. So where you like physically do experiments and then see how that relates. Usually with astrophysics, it focuses on things farther away, so like black holes and other solar systems and stars, whereas astrobiology can go that way, but it can also be similar. So one of the core areas of interest is origins of life. We're interested in which areas in our solar system could harbor life. We're interested in what is actually needed. Obviously on Earth we have our core components. We know you need carbon, we know you need water, but is that true across the board? Are other areas able? So it really just kind of dives a bit deeper into some of the possibilities for life, and then of course looking for potential areas. So right now, kind of the hotter topics in astrobiology tend to be some of the icy moons, so like Europa, Enceladus, some of the places that we think have a subsurface ocean, subsurface liquid ocean. So those are kind of those areas of interest. Could there be bacteria living there? Could there be something there? Also, the moon of Titan is very interesting because it also has liquid, but it's liquid methane and ethane, so not exactly like water, but could something live in those conditions? So it's a lot of experimentation in those realms and kind of testing those limits of possibility. And you can lean more, like I said, with exoplanets and things further away, so like looking for planets similar to Earth that could maybe have life. But it's I tell, especially to kids, I'm always like, it's basically like looking for aliens. We're looking for them somewhere. But more than likely, we're going after like bacterial aliens. That's, we have much higher hopes of bacteria living somewhere than we have for, actual aliens somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that I find fascinating about all of the research and about the fact that, we're sending scientists, and you talk in your book, which I think is great, about how NASA used to mostly go to the military, and then they were like, wait a second, we should be sending scientists to space. There's an argument that people always make of, why are we spending all of this money going to space when we have so many problems on Earth? And I'm like, because space is awesome. But also because there's so much that we learn, right? Like the list of benefits and technology and things that we got from the moon mission and the moon landing and everything that we did to get to the moon really has helped us build the modern world that we have. And so I think that there's so much that people don't understand about how space travel and how this, this mission to Mars and this attempt to try to reach Mars can really benefit us here on Earth. Can you talk a little bit about what those benefits are and why it's important for us to continue space travel?
Yeah, I always say that I think space really just pushes us to think outside of the box, and I think that always leads to really cool new inventions. As you mentioned, I mean, there's so many things that we have today that we just simply wouldn't have, especially as quickly without the push of the space industry, especially from a technology side. I used to always joke, like, if there was a, like, NASA logo or, like, some sort of space logo on, like, every, diaper or every, like, handless vacuum or, like, everything that had part in, like, some of the technologies that were developed for space, I think people would have a much greater appreciation for it. But
I
it
love
just
that
takes,
idea.
yeah. But it definitely like takes so much time, to come up with these things and then also translate them down to those real world applications. But I think any space mission has always had real world applications. I think most people can see the science more clearly, that, like, when we send missions or do science up in space, that could lead to science things here. And technology, maybe, that's a little bit different to think of. But like you mentioned, even with the Mars mission, hopefully that would push even further, mainly just because since Mars would be more of a long-term-ish mission. I mean, not long-term as in, forever, but, a longer mission than, like, going to the International Space Station. We're going to have to develop some more things that would be more, surviving somewhere else. And so whether that's in habitats, whether that's growing food, whether that's, environments that protect us from radiation. And so all those different challenges that we have would have to be resolved before going to Mars. And again, those same technologies should hopefully be able to then be translated down here on Earth as well. I always say, like, if we can learn to grow food on Mars, then we should easily be able to grow food on areas on Earth that maybe struggle with agriculture, maybe don't have as good a weather for certain types of crops. But, maybe if we're able to have a system that works better, we maybe be able to see more growth across different areas here on Earth. Radiation can be very helpful, for our own protection. We're always worried about, solar flares or different levels of radiation coming to Earth. And so maybe having a good idea of how to protect ourselves for that could, be helpful. So there's a lot of these things that, we could just not go to Mars and focus on those problems, but they would never really be the focus. We would never just randomly prioritize that kind of challenge. Whereas space, I think, pushes us to focus on those problems and try to get them solved. So I think in that way, it does a really good job of having an important problem that needs to be solved for one purpose, but then we can kind of use it for other purposes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a Roddenberry Fellow, and every year I teach Star Trek 101 to the new fellow class. And one of the things I do is give them a list of all of the technology that they had in Star Trek first. And then the engineers and nerds who watched it were like, wait, I want to build that. And that has resulted in so much technology that we have. And I love your idea. I really think NASA should do a campaign and just slap a NASA sticker on everything
Yeah.
that we have because of NASA. That would make such a difference. You should tell NASA about that. So, Caitlin, here's the real question. What are our actual chances of getting to Mars? What is it looking like right now?
Yeah, I think right now space is in a bit of almost like a changing process, almost like growing pains, I would say, in a way, just, where there's been so much more confusion in figuring out, okay, what the plans are. From now we're transitioning to this new age of balancing government space versus private space. And I think that that's really just kind of opened the door of, like, okay, then what types of missions are private space focusing on? What types of missions would government space focus on? And kind of that balance. I mean, I think for NASA's standpoint, they are working on their Artemis rocket. They had the launch of Artemis 1. Obviously, there are plans of the next launch, which will be the first, like, crewed mission. So the next launch should have people on it, and that will be a test. And then Artemis 3 will hopefully actually go to the moon. So their general idea was to have some idea of permanent presence on the moon. by the late 2020s, so 2028, 2029. So whether that's like a habitat or some sort of situation on the moon, that's kind of their ultimate goal. And then kind of Mars is future sites from there, depending on how all of that goes. I mean, you're always going to have your struggles with government space, whether that's funding, whether that's, timing, or especially with NASA, there's always administration changes, which can change like the head of NASA, which sometimes can change their main objectives and kind of rotate what they're focused on. So there always has been and always will be those issues with government space and kind of changing the idea. But I think that they're on the right track for seeing people back on the moon in the 2020s. And then I guess from there, I'll kind of see where we're at with technology advances and kind of solving some of the outstanding problems that we still have with like a mission to Mars. So I would say that it's on the table there. Of course, you have people like Elon Musk that always says that he's going to Mars next week or next year. There's always those ideas that kind of creep up. And so I think really in terms of a Mars mission, I think that there's still some technology advances that's being worked on. I know a big one is engines and trying to make that mission to Mars shorter with kind of the current day, your shuttle engine. They were looking at, taking 6 months to get from Earth to Mars. And the ultimate goal would be to shorten that to something shorter, like 6 weeks. And so that has been a huge kind of project in the works in trying to get better engines to shorten the trip to make it more feasible for a manned mission to actually go. So I think, once all these things keep getting worked on, and we'll kind of see more of a better timeline. But, I think it's within the realm of possibility. We just kind of have to continue pursuing the idea of it. And I think going back to the moon is a really great starting point. And just, it's very different. It's a very different transition than, sending people to the International Space Station to actually sending people somewhere. I think they're very different kind of mindsets and whole different mission objectives. So I think that'll be a great thing to see. And especially for young kids too, to see something as cool as seeing people go back to the moon. I know even me, I was growing up and hearing about space. I was always kind of jealous of that, like just the Apollo energy that there was, everyone being so kind of unified and proud of what a successful mission all that was. And so I think that we'll really see that again, and people just being really proud of something really cool that we're able to accomplish. So that's really what I'll be looking forward to.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing. And we just actually had the anniversary a little over a week ago of the
Yeah.
moon landing, which is my favorite day. So one of the things that I think that people don't realize is when JFK made his fabulous moon speech. We go to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. One of my favorite speeches. But said, hey, we're going to do this. That it ushered in this age in which math and science education became very prominent in America, and we had so many young people studying science, studying engineering, because even though the astronauts are the stars, of course, of the space program, the great thing about NASA is it is this massive team of folks. I used to do archery with a bunch of guys from JPL, and one of the guys' jobs was just to look for new planets. Like all day, I just look at this guy looking for a new planet, and I'm like, that is the coolest job ever, right? But it takes so many people doing so many different jobs, and everything you're talking about. None of that is stuff that the astronauts are doing, right? This is
Right.
all stuff that the huge team is doing. So for anyone listening who is like, I think this is awesome, I would love to be part of this. I don't want to be an astronaut. Space is scary. What are some of the jobs and some of the ways that people, and especially young people who are maybe thinking about careers, can think about joining the space program? What are other opportunities other than being an astronaut?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's so many career paths within space. And I mean, I would say that if you're interested in a space career, I mean, now really is the time, just because I will say there are more space startups and more space companies in existence now than there ever has been. And, they all have different projects. Not all of them are necessarily focused on, human space flight. Some of them may have different objectives, maybe focus more on satellites, maybe more focus on telescopes. Maybe more of a focus on even companies looking at doing space hotels, or, you really can go as big and grand as you want. I think there's so many ideas within the space industry. And I think a lot of the times we do get really caught up on thinking that space is solely math and science, because you hear space and you're like, oh, well, you have to be really good at math and science to do all of that. And math and science are definitely important factors when it comes to the different things that go on. But I love reminding people that it's more than that. There are so many other career paths that relate to space. If you just have like a surface level general interest in space, but maybe you're not bothered in understanding the complexities, which is totally valid. Space is totally cool on the surface without understanding the equations and all the things that go into it. So, I think one of, or like some of the cool things I would say would be like psychology, I think is a huge one that's been really big, just especially when thinking long term with something like a mission to Mars. We obviously need to consider, how astronauts will handle being in close quarters with one another for such long periods of time. And if you kind of like keep up with a few little articles, NASA's been doing a few studies here lately with, they'll ask participants to do studies with working with one another, staying in like solitude with people. And so that's all really just understanding the psychology of, how do we pick and choose which people go and what personalities are going to match and what are going to kind of go against each other. If you're sending people even to the moon, you want to make sure that you're sending not only a range of skills, like a pilot and a scientist and, kind of a range of skills, but you also want to look at kind of personality traits that will work together as a team and do well. And so all that kind of plays a factor in choosing astronaut selections, choosing who goes on which missions, who to pair with who. And so I think that's a really fascinating and really big part of kind of things that go on in space. Also, I always mention food. I think that's one of the coolest parts about a space job is thinking about which foods go up, because a lot of those are really fun. The Italian astronaut that went to the International Space Station who said she couldn't live with coffee, so they had to figure out how to build a espresso machine that would work in microgravity. And all of those are just like cool engineering projects. Or even food fatigue is a big area of interest. Making sure the astronauts aren't eating the same peanut butter and jelly sandwich every single day and losing their minds because of that. So there's so many factors to consider. It's not just the dangers of space to keep in mind, but it's also just kind of the mundane tasks that they're able to focus on. I'm sure different fitness things are really important. Thinking about exercises that astronauts are able to do that maybe will work certain muscles but are adaptable to a microgravity environment. So really, especially talking about living in space, everything is applied, right? Where they're brushing their teeth, they're brushing their hair, they're getting haircuts, they're kind of doing all these things that we do here on Earth, but with the added challenge of space. And so you're kind of going to need a little bit of expertise from all sorts of people down here on Earth to really kind of weigh in. Engineers could be really good at building things, but they definitely may not understand other complexities. So, whenever Sally Ride went to space and she became the first American, the engineers offered to send her with 100 tampons in case, she would need those. And so that's, I think, a really good story just to like show people that engineers are really amazing at their job, but they may not understand all aspects. And so I think that that's where some of these like other areas of expertise really play an important factor in all things space. So tens of thousands of people go into making sure one astronaut can do their mission and live up there.
Yeah, there's a comedian who has a great song about the 100 tampons that
It's so
comes
good.
out every time. But speaking of the incredible Sally Ride, one of the things that I love about you is that you are young and female, and you're doing all these extraordinary things. And I think that we somewhat sadly, I feel a little sad for Gloria Steinem, but we're still at a time when people think that there are so many fields that women can't go into, or they hear astronaut and they think man. But for me, Mae Jemison has been my hero since I was a little girl. I'm still very
She's
mad at
awesome.
my mom for not getting me Black Astronaut Barbie. I'll talk about it with my therapist. And obviously, I love Sally Ride and Valentina Tereshkova and all of the women. I have the little Lego NASA women set behind my desk, who are a huge part and have been for so long. And I feel are finally starting to get a little bit of credit in films and books of the space program. And yet people still really don't know. emceed a panel at a film festival when the new film about Nichelle Nichols came out and how she helped diversify NASA. And there were so many people who had no idea. But one really cool thing about reading your book was that there are so many women in NASA who have been a real part of your journey. So who are some of your space heroes, and who are some of the women in NASA or in the fields surrounding it that have been really meaningful for you?
Yeah, I think I always specifically have looked up to, women who were astronauts. Whenever I'd go somewhere, I'd always love to be able to go and talk to the women and see what their career paths were. And being able to see other women as astronauts was obviously very inspiring as a kid. And I think there's been so many people, so many women throughout my life that have kind of given me little like tidbits of advice. Astronauts obviously are like a big one, but even outside of that, as you mentioned, it's not just about bringing the diversity in women in the astronaut corps, but it's across all these tens of thousands of jobs that we just mentioned, and seeing women represented across all these different variations of career paths that play into the space industry, where I think it's really important. I know that whenever I was young and interested in like astrophysics, it was really awesome because whenever I did make more of a transition in my interest for astrobiologists, it was actually a woman astrobiologist that was working at NASA at the time, and she came up to me and she was like, "Astrophysics, huh? Like, do you want to do that? Like, let me tell you about astrobiology." And I was like instantly hooked. And, she made such a big difference in me seeing that transition in myself and wanting to kind of change that area of interest in my life. So, I think that just having someone to talk to or someone to kind of see yourself in makes a big difference. Having the opportunity to go to space camp, and, they do a really good job of like inviting astronauts, and, Dottie Metcalf-Lindenberger is a really common one that goes there all the time and is always really awesome for speaking with kids and inspiring them. So I think, no matter what, it's always been, someone kind of in my area. I think when I was younger, I really, not like sheltered in a way, but I felt like I saw so many women working in the space industry, whether it was like a few female astronauts, or I almost thought, I thought it was normal for so many women to be involved. And then it wasn't really until I got to college, I was like, wait, why aren't there that many girls, in my field or in my major or in some of my STEM classes? I went to a very like STEM forward university, so we were already, a little male dominated in that way. But it really wasn't until college that I was like, oh wait, like there really aren't that as many girls going into this as like I originally thought. And so I think that was really like a light bulb that hit, just because I felt like I grew up really lucky in seeing so many women working in it, but not everyone sees all those women. And so I think it's important to highlight their voices. And as you mentioned, there's many astronauts. Mae Jemison is an amazing one who she's really used her platform to really share that light on encouraging girls to go into it. So I think that they've done such a good job in pushing that to allow girls to see that's possible.
They have, and as much as all the women are great, I think my favorite person in your book, who you reminded me so much of Ellie in Contact, is that you have an amazing dad. Just like, I was just reading, I was like, God, she has the best dad ever. And he's been so supportive and believed in you and just took care. I was just like in tears. I was like, your dad is the best. Can you talk a little bit about your dad? But also, I loved when you said that like, your grandparents knew you were into space and they saw a space camp billboard and were like, we got to take Alyssa. Like, you have this really wonderful support system, which is so important and which is something that can be difficult to find for folks. So can you talk a little bit about that support system and how helpful it's been?
Yeah, definitely. I always share. I think that you have to have some sort of support system, especially to go after big dreams, whether that is parents or friends, or it could be a teacher, or, having someone who, even if they aren't like out there helping you every single day work towards your dream, even if they're just like, yeah, you got this, or that sounds so cool, or, just even being a little voice of encouragement can make a really big difference. My dad was always really great growing up and helping me in my interests, and, he knew nothing about space when we first got started, but he was like, well, I guess if Alyssa likes it, then we'll go for it. He definitely, when I first mentioned space, had no idea that it would turn into such a big fascination and that I would stick with it forever. So he definitely didn't have that expectation at first, but I think at each step of the way, he was learning with me, the first time that I ever went to space camp, we like went together. We did like a family version of space camp. So he had to ride all the simulators and he had to like learn all the information that I was learning. And so I think that being so plugged in, he got to slowly understand more where my interests were coming from. And so I think that really helped a lot in kind of building that support system up, because he was starting to understand like, okay, like this is kind of cool. Like he started like getting it a bit more. And so it's been so fun to be able to have that support and know that he's kind of always good with whatever I do. And he's been such a good balance of like pushing me in a way to do things, but then also like letting me kind of choose my path, just because one of the examples I love using is when I first started flying to get my pilot's license. I went the first time and I came back and my dad was like, how was it? I was like, it was awful. It was terrible. I never want to do it again. Like, it was just the worst. It's not for me. And he was like, well, why don't you try one more time? And then like, if you don't like it, then, you know, you don't have to do it anymore. Like, it's totally up to you. But he made me go a second time, and then I did that. He was like, how was it? And I was like, it was the best time ever. I was flying the plane, and it was like a full 180. So I think it's been really cool to kind of have someone that can kind of understand that sometimes, you know, I need to try something one more time, or kind of knows when I've hit my limit on doing something. And so that's been really amazing to have my dad kind of by my side and doing all that.
Well, and one thing that really sort of made my jaw drop is I was reading this book and I was like, oh, she's just been so laser focused on space and this Mars thing, and she's doing all this stuff. And then you talk about like, well, my dad wanted to make sure I was well-rounded, so I played competitive soccer, did all these other things. So I was like, my God, does she have 72 hours in a day? Like, yeah, it sounds like, and I think this is something that is important. You know, one problem, I'm a progressive activist and always have been, and in the activist world people get like very focused on like, this is my thing and I'm only focusing on this issue and I'm never doing anything else and I'm never watching a movie or whatever. And it's like, that is a way to A, burn out, and B, just become sort of a warped person. And it seems like your dad did a really good job of helping you stay well-rounded and making sure you have friends, right? You weren't like the nerdy space girl you got made fun of. You went to dances and this and that, and I thought that was really powerful and a really good reminder for people, but also parents of, you know, young people who are really focused, that being well-rounded is really important.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, although I liked space at a young age, it wasn't something to drop my whole life for and like go off and, you know, there wasn't necessarily something like that. And so really anytime, I mainly focus summers on doing anything space related. And so if we were kind of planning on wanting to get this done or get that done, we would try to work it around either school breaks or during the summer. But then during the school year, I was just going to school like everyone else. And I was just, you know, getting involved in clubs and activities and things like that like everyone else. And so on a day-to-day basis, it wasn't, as you mentioned, like space all day, every day. It wasn't like the only thing I ever talked about. It was just, you know, whenever I did have time to do something for it, we would go off and do it, and that would be so much fun. But I think it built in a really like good system of like, I was always excited to do something space related and wasn't necessarily burnt out of it because I had like designated time for it. You know, it wasn't like a constant all the time, like must be talking about space type of attitude. It really was like, okay, when I have this dedicated time, that's like my space time. This is my school time. Because my dad was really big on me, you know, focusing on school and getting homework done and all of the boring things that you have to get done as a kid. And so he was really good on making sure that balance was there and prioritizing that. And so that kind of, you know, helps with that work-life balance in a way. And I mean, I think that even still today, you know, I have so much of that, like everything can't always be space, but, you know, a lot of the time it is. And I mean, I guess I'm kind of fortunate now that my school is basically space related now. So I guess I get a little bit more space time than I used to. But it was always important that we had that, especially since, you know, in Louisiana, there wasn't necessarily a big push for things related to space. There wasn't necessarily a lot of opportunity there. So we really did have to kind of separate them out. But I think, as you mentioned, it worked really good in keeping that distinction. And, you know, really all those extracurriculars, I was like, well, my friends are doing it, so I guess I'll do it.
That's amazing. I lived in Opelousas for a little bit, and actually I thought about this because I drove through Huntsville once and I saw the billboard for the space station and I was like, I really want to go, but I was like on my way somewhere and I was like, oh, I know that road well, and yeah, you do have to sort of travel and leave,
Right.
and and you talk about the fact that your dad was a freelance videographer meant that he was used to flexibility, which was useful for you. So it sounds like you just learned so many things that have helped you a lot on this journey.
Yeah, definitely. Luckily, he was way used to traveling and knew more of the logistics and that sort of thing. So he was very comfortable with that aspect. I mean, especially when he was doing so much more like freelance. I mean, he would hardly ever be home, and so he was like, "Oh, we're not at home. Like that's normal." So he was much very comfortable with that. So I think that that definitely helped in the transition of once I was go go go. He was totally used to that. He thought that once he had me, he would be at home all the time and be much more laid back. But then of course, he had to have a daughter that was go, 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 just like him. So,
That's funny. So, last question. One of the things that I really love about the book is that the second half is broken down into some really good narratives about sort of different steps on how to become an astronaut, and then some different worksheets and things that people can sort of work out for themselves. And the reason that I liked that is because the first half is pretty intimidating. The first half is really like, this woman is a total badass, and I'm just gonna go hide under the covers because I could never. And so you break it down a little bit. I think it's still pretty intimidating, but it's nice that at least to give people a chance to feel like, okay, maybe I could break this down into steps. And one of the things that I thought of was, there was so much that I read in your book that was inspirational for me as I'm on my own sort of big journey. And that this is really a model for so many people who are trying to accomplish something, whether it's be an astronaut or get a bill passed in Congress or whatever it is. Can you just sort of end with some words of wisdom for anyone, particularly young women, who maybe read your book or look on your very intimidating Instagram and are like, I could never do this. Like, this seems like it's too much. And I didn't start when I was 7. Like, I'm already 30. It's too late. Of how we can sort of take your example, but achieve things, and maybe not be so ready to just lock ourselves in a closet because you've beaten us all.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, my main motivation in putting together a book and kind of being it more of an instruction guide, obviously all of my experiences and all of my kind of advice drives from areas and interests within space, but I'd always have people asking me who also want to be astronauts and how do they do what I did and XYZ. And so it wasn't just trying to make sure I shared what I did, because I tell people all the time, you can do every single thing that I did to a T, or absolutely not one thing that I did and just don't follow me whatsoever and end up in the exact same position. There's no rule book, there's no guide of exactly how to do it or which steps to take. And there's so many career paths and opportunities within the space industry, or honestly just any career path. You can always kind of pave your own way. And I think so much of that drives from your personal interests. And so that's why I always found it difficult, like trying to tell kids how to go about, wanting to become an astronaut or how to go about it, because really it's up to you, right? At the end of the day, it's, what are you interested in? What do you want to pursue? Maybe, you have an interest in this. And so really my bits of advice can only come from, I think it's important to have a support system around you. I think it's important to not let someone take your dream away from you. I think that if you have something that you're really passionate about and want to work towards it, then I think it's important to stick to that, because at the end of the day, you know what you're interested in and you know what you're capable of. And I think that with hard work, that can become a reality. I also think it's really important to kind of keep that balance, push yourself and try to, try new things and, be be exploratory in those different elements that maybe relate. And then also, it's really important to talk about your dreams and your goals and share with other people what you're interested in. I know it's really intimidating. I was actually really shy as a kid, and I think that my dad did help a lot with that, because he would be like, she likes space, Alyssa, tell them how you like space. So I think that it's important to talk about your goals, and it can be really, vulnerable to share that with people, but really so many opportunities can come from talking about your goals that you want to do. You never know who someone knows. You never know what opportunity or connection could fall into place. I mean, almost everything that I've ever done has honestly just come from chatting with people, and they would say, oh, I know so-and-so who maybe does this, or I have a friend that does that. And, always the weirdest connections, not necessarily people that are high up or know a lot, or they don't necessarily seem like they're really interconnected, but you just never know. And so really talking about your goals, you can get some really good advice and support. Don't be afraid to reach out. I think it's, for me, looking at other female astronauts or other people working in the space industry was really motivating. But I mean, even no matter what the path is, if you know someone who has that same career path, just ask them how they got there. What was their, best piece of advice they got, or what advice would they give going into that career path? I mean, even those simple things can make a really big difference. But at the end of the day, I think it's just, if you have something that you're interested in, go for it. There's nothing to stop you. If you change your mind, that's totally fine. Just slowly make the transition. I think that sometimes we can feel too locked in if we start working towards something, but I think that's just how life goes. You'll constantly evolve and learn more about yourself and kind of transition to what you're meant to be doing. So just kind of be open to those transitions and make it work. But yeah, definitely don't feel obligated to do absolutely exactly everything that I did. It's not the holy grail to get there.
Well, Alyssa, you have a new fan. I cannot wait to watch you be the first person to step on Mars on my television. I am totally in awe of you. Thank you so much for joining this podcast. You're a total inspiration.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation with Alyssa Carson. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It's the best way to help more people find the show. And remember, everything you are is more than enough. Thanks.